Hello? Hello. Can you hear me? I'm live. Welcome to Phenomenology Club. Talk about it. The podcast series for Phenomenology Club. Can you hear me? Anyway, I seem to have attracted some strange people to this upload tonight. Kumari Raptish, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Like I said, I don't believe in censorship, so I won't kick you out for being annoying, but if you keep flooding the chat with your dumb bullshit, I might have to censor you because we're here to talk about art, not whatever the fuck you're on, guy. So just chill out because you know what? Maybe you're a cool guy, maybe you're a great guy, and we want to talk to you. We all want to talk together about art. Also, a little announcement before I begin. I've been thinking. Hi, Cammy. I've been thinking that I might not definitely do this, but since now we're on Spotify and shit, thanks to Anchor, I might put these live streams behind the Patreon paywall for no other reason except I'm a broke ass bitch and I need to stop neglecting my responsibilities. I don't really believe in making any art cost money. I make sure that any art I make is always free, but as we discussed last upload, this podcast is not art. This podcast is simply a thing that serves a functional purpose, and one of those purposes is to give myself a little bit of income. So it's something I'm thinking about. But our club is only $1 a month, and I would make the uploads live public eventually, but maybe I'll make the option to interact live behind the paywall. I'm sorry if that really kills anybody. Then damn, I don't know. I gotta think about it. I'm gonna pray about it. I'm gonna ask the Lord what the Lord thinks. So anyway, last upload from 2 days ago, I don't know if you guys listened to it, but it was so fun. I love talking about art. I don't know about you guys, but talking about art rules, in my opinion. And that conversation got really weird. It ended up in a discussion about whether or not terrorism could be considered art, which I was not planning. It got really interesting. So make sure you go listen to that if you haven't. But let's talk about this idea that I have named this upload after. This idea that good art is about itself. Now, I have to make a confession. I definitely, with the aim of trying to, up my income, made this title a little clickbaity. I don't know if I personally do believe that good art is about itself, but I think really what we are going to talk about tonight is just this idea that all art is about itself. And the reason that I say good art is about itself is because I think that the best art naturally will align with the goal of art. And what is the goal of art? Anybody have an idea? What do you guys think we make art for? We were talking about it last stream, and one dictionary definition put forth the idea that art creates something beautiful. I think that this is a very popular idea, that the goal of art is to make something beautiful. Bro, Kumari, you're annoying. Should I kick this person out? You're not even talking about art. Kumari, please get on our, brother, we're reaching out to you. We're trying to bring you into our art discussion. Kumari, if you don't start talking about art, I'm going to kick you out. Those are my conditions. You've been warned. You have a few more minutes to change whatever you're talking about to art. If you don't start talking about art, you're out of here. So, Kumari, what do you think about art? What are your ideas? What do you guys think that the purpose of art is? Anybody? Somebody said meaning. What does that mean, raw tendencies? Tell us. What do you mean by that? What the fuck is art for, huh? You love Rothko. Great. I love Rothko too. See, Kumari, I knew you could join us. I love Rothko too. And I sort of use Rothko as like a reoccurring theme on this channel because, like, I love Rothko, but I'm not like the biggest Rothko stan in the world. But I feel like Rothko's work represents in a really great way for myself exactly what I'm getting at when I say bullshit like good art is about itself. We talked last time about what art is, and I think everybody agreed, and tell me if you don't agree. But we all seem to agree with the dictionary that the dictionary definition that Merriam-Webster, the real dictionary, established, that art is an aesthetic creation made by individual humans that is created with the purpose of being judged for its aesthetic properties, you know? Art exists basically as a justification for itself. I believe that the best art is art that promotes this goal. So when we're trying to make a good art piece, right, and this is why I use Rothko often when talking about this, I think that all art pieces need to consider first and foremost, not the art pieces themselves, obviously, because they are not sentient, but the artist. I think the artist needs to consider first and foremost, what the fuck are you making? Because a lot of people definitely subscribe to this idea that art exists to be beautiful, right? Or to evoke some sort of emotional response, which was the segue into our last discussion about how terrorism could potentially be called art. I didn't say it is or isn't, by the way, but that was our segue into the conversation. But I don't believe that either of these things is necessarily true, you know. Does all art evoke some emotional response? If it doesn't evoke an emotional response, is it art? And also, how would you even define emotional response, you know? Do I even ever exist in a state where I'm not having some sort of emotional response to my immediate surroundings? Right now, am I having an emotional response to anything? I would say I likely am, you know. What constitutes having an emotional response? When am I having one and when am I not? And this is an interesting idea too that I won't get too into, but I definitely want to talk about one day. And something I've been researching on my own recently because, you know, I don't know much about these things as I'm not a scientist, so I have to look them up and read about them. But as far as I know, no emotion has ever been proven to exist separate from other emotions. You know, a thing like anger and a thing like sadness don't necessarily like ever show up even on, you know, neuroscientific imaging studies as having different properties. Like different parts of your brain can be activated when you have these different sorts of things that you describe later as you experiencing this emotional response to something, but there's no defining characteristics that would let anybody else know, like, this is when you feel anger, this is when you feel sad. Like, I kind of feel like all emotion likely is probably the same thing, or not probably, but I see no reason to think that like anger and sadness or anger and joy are like actually different emotions at all. Like they all kind of present as just this like incredible visceral, almost physical excitement that I think come to have different distinct properties only through the lens of how I'm translating it back to myself. Do you understand? All right, Miguel, you're not helping our brother Kumari come back to the light. Please don't fight. Let's have a vote. This is a democracy. Do I need to kick this person out? Because I'm not going to stare at the chat and figure it out. All who say kick Kumari out say aye. And all who vote that our brother stays and we lead him back to the light say aye aye. I, by the way, is spelled A-Y-E. Brie. It's called Talk About It, not Solve World Hunger. Oh. Let's get back on topic. This is why I'm beginning to feel the emotion of irritation. Anyway, so what do you guys think? Do you think art necessarily evokes emotional response? Or that emotional response, or that art needs to be beautiful? Can I get some answers? All right, we voted. Most of us vote to let our brother Kumari stay so we can try to lead him back into the light. Good. I don't want to see about this again. Next time it bothers me, I'm kicking you out. Anyway, so, what do you guys think? Do you agree with this definition? That art exists as a thing created by humans with the purpose of being art. As far as I'm concerned, that is the definition of art, you know? And you can have good art and you can have bad art, which we're going to begin to talk about how we can discern between the two. But do you all agree with this definition? If someone makes a thing and says, this is my art, as far as I'm concerned, that's art, right? Do we have any dissenters to this idea? I don't know what kind of objection you could even raise here. Because as far as I'm concerned, yeah, you can make the shittiest art piece imaginable, but if you make it and say it's your art, fuck it, dude, that's your art. Raw Tendency says, art can be whatever the fuck it wants to be. Does not need to be this grand, deep, profound purpose every time. I absolutely agree. Bash says, art without context, even emotional in its intended environment, is void. Well, Bash, does anything exist without a context? I would say no, so I'm not sure the relevance of your statement. Miguel, here we go. Let's start to fight. Miguel says there's no objectivity to art. You can't say there's bad art or good art. Here, Miguel, is where I disagree. I definitely disagree with this idea that there is no objectivity to art. But let me preface this by saying I don't personally believe in some hyperbolic existent definition of the word objectivity to begin with, you know. Objectivity, as far as I know, or as far as I believe, is simply a hypothetical concept that we use often to describe a state of conditions that describes a thing that's generally unaffected by any individual perspective on it, you know. So I might say the sky is objectively blue, you know. I wouldn't say this. I don't speak this way, and I don't really ever use the word objective to begin with for reasons I've discussed in great detail on this channel. But I understand the concept being put forth there, and I would agree with it. I wouldn't raise much contention there. This idea that most people will experience the sky as this color, blue, even if we all experience it maybe individually different. And we know for a fact that people like colorblind people don't experience it all like that color or what have you. But like I said, objectivity, I think, just describes a hypothetical set of conditions. And the reason I believe that art does have some sort of objective criteria for how we can talk about it is because the same kind of agreement is reached when talking about art as when we talk about, you know, the sky being blue. Because do you believe that art exists? If you believe that art exists, then I would say you're already putting forth some sort of an objective proposition, right? If there's no objective criteria with which we can talk about art and how it's made or what makes it good, then what the fuck even is art? You're basically describing art as if it's some subjective emotion, which we all know it isn't. Art is a thing that literally exists in the world, you know? Miguel says, you are contradicting the philosophy of phenomenology by saying that art can be objectively bad. I didn't say that art can be objectively bad. I said that there's objective criteria, and I said objective in a way where I also stated I don't believe that true objectivity exists in the most hypothetical sense, but I do believe that there's criteria established when we talk about art that we can use to talk about art and with which we can talk about whether or not art is good or bad. I don't believe that you can objectively prove a piece of art is good or bad, But I believe that using the same criteria that I would argue resembles something objective to establish whether or not a thing is art in the first place can then be used by the individual to form a subjective opinion on whether or not a piece of art is good or bad. This is how I judge art as an individual. I use this criteria that establishes the definition of art in the first place to form my own personal opinion on whether or not I believe it's good or bad, Miguel. To that, what say you? Huh? Huh? Can we have a call with her and discuss this live? I am discussing this live. You can pay $1 and come into Phenomenology Club and fight me back on voice chat. That's what we do in there. You fundamentally disagree with my take. I understand that. Tell me why. I've barely even begun to tell you, so let me continue. So, I believe that if you believe there is a definition, that art is a real thing that exists, that you are already putting forth this idea, that you believe there is some sort of objective criteria that establishes the presence of art as an actual thing in the first place. And what is it? In my opinion, this criteria that establishes the definition is simply just defining art. Art is art, a thing you make, a material thing you make in most circumstances that you present with the purpose of being judged for its aesthetic properties. You're presenting something that you believe to be aesthetically interesting. That's why you made it, right? A painting is a piece of art. It's an aesthetic object with materiality that you present to the world to be judged for its aesthetic qualities. I see a lot of people are disagreeing but not saying why. So why don't you start saying why? Because we're here to talk about it. Anyway, so let's use this Rothko example. I put a Rothko piece in the thumbnail. Bethany, if that's true, then taking a shit is art? Why? Why would taking a shit be art? Did you take a shit with some intentional purpose to take the shit and present it to us as a thing to be aesthetically judged? You could take a shit in a gallery and say your shit is art or whatever. Bring your shit to the gallery and say it's art. If you say it, sure. I'll give you a critique. I'll say I hate your dumb, shitty art. I'll say that's the dumbest fucking art I ever saw in my fucking life. But if you say it's art, sure. like Raw Tendency said earlier, it's not deep. It's not profound. Art is not even that fucking deep. And I think that's why people disagree with these takes, because they want to believe that art is this deep, mystical, profound thing. It really isn't. There's nothing spiritual or metaphysical about art, you know? Of course, it's a very interesting phenomena in the sense that it is hard to define, I think, in many instances, what makes art viscerally pleasing, you know? Like the fact that certain colors might trigger within you some visceral response, you know? I think clearly there's something neurological and physiological happening there when you have these kinds of experiences. And also when listening to music, you know, we aren't entirely sure why things like rhythm bring us pleasure. What is it about rhythm that makes us feel so good? A lot of people say it's the expectancy that becomes built, the anticipation of hearing the next beat, and then the fulfillment of it hitting right when you think it's going to. But we really don't understand exactly what makes rhythm so pleasurable. Oh, Jesus, Miguel. Miguel says, it's a shallow view because art has the power to move people on emotional level and elicit them. What am I saying, Miguel, that you find contradictory to that idea? I believe much art definitely does incite people to having some emotional response. Do you guys feel as if I'm saying something that runs contrary to that viewpoint? Because I don't believe I have done that. Cammy, art is deep because it says so much without our normal everyday language. We as humans make assumptions. It's deep because it connects us to a common abstract experience, even if the artist didn't intend. I disagree with that very much. I'll tell you why in a minute. Miguel, just because you're unable to engage with art in a meaningful way doesn't mean that others also aren't, and art itself is a broad term. Really, Miguel? You think I'm unable to engage with art in a meaningful way? Then why the fuck do I make so much of it? And toil with my blood and my sweat and my tears over all the art. Miguel says that I don't engage with art meaningfully. Miguel, you have evoked within me an emotional response. How dare you? How dare you? Cammy's ready to fight. Look, Miguel, I think that you are being hypocritical a bit because you seem to be saying that, what makes art so great is like simply the individual's relationship to any given art piece. But I feel as if you are being hypercritical of this idea I'm putting forth, that what makes art so enjoyable to me is established on totally different criteria. Miguel, art is not a term that simply encompasses paintings. Literature and films both constitute as art too, and I would be surprised if you hadn't engaged with those meaningfully. No shit, Miguel. I have a fine arts degree with a focus in film. Ugh! I'm so misunderstood. Anyway, let me just ignore the chat for a second and get this idea out, and then we can fight some more. So basically, I use Rothko as a reoccurring theme on this channel because I think that his work is a perfect vehicle for the point that I'm trying to make here when I say that art is about itself. That every art piece that is made needs to present a justification for why it exists, because this is the purpose of art itself. I think that the goal of art is simply to be art. Just because I think the goal of any object is simply to be that thing. And this is an idea that is only established through language, right? There's no actual purpose to art. There's no actual purpose to a television. There's no actual purpose to a tree or to a bird or to us. Purpose is a concept that we came up with, and we use it in very meaningful ways. Me saying that this is some constructed concept that we use in language is not me trying to act as if the concept is vain or meaningless. Same with how I'm talking about art. I'm not trying to make the argument that none of these things are meaningless. In fact, I'm trying to put forward this idea that all meaning is established by us. And I think that's something to take great pride in, When people say things like there is no real meaning, I disagree with that framework, I think that life is incredibly meaningful, language is incredibly meaningful, art is incredibly meaningful, meaning is incredibly meaningful, and meaning and meaningful are concepts that we created, which is why we're the shit. Thank you. Shout out to all the other animals too, because you're also the shit. But we make art, and I'm sure animals make art as well. But anyway, so Rothko, I think, is a really good example of this idea that his paintings exist essentially to make statements about painting itself. They are self-critical in a way, I feel like, Rothko's paintings are not really burdened by any sort of heavy conceptual ideas, We often, for centuries, for centuries, the goal of painting was assumed to be, to be representative, to represent objects in our everyday experience, whether it was other people, landscapes, still lifes, and not necessarily to capture them perfectly, because, many famous painters, I don't think necessarily try to create perfect representations in the sense that they were capturing something that perfectly resembled what the human eye experiences. I think of Jan van Eyck or whatever. His shit almost looks like cartoons, But those of us who have taken intro to art history, Western Civ, whatever, we know, what kind of lofty language and ideas exist around this culture of painting traditionally that very much sought to, well, it was very rooted in this idea of representation and capturing the sublime. So in a sense, it did exist to capture something that transcended vision in and of itself. But Rothko, I think, and I think it's not just Rothko, he's just the mascot for this idea that I think really emerges in the past century when we're looking at the history of Western art. It kind of begins with the, I'm forgetting my art history 101. Not the abstract expressionists. Who are the guys before? What was Van Gogh? What was his deal? People started to fuck up the paintings and think actually, maybe I'm just trying to abstract the phenomena of all of my experience. Maybe we're trying to externalize my inner experience and share it with others. And Rothko creates these paintings that really have no conceptual ideas behind them. It's simply just paint on canvas. I mean, look at the picture in the thumbnail that I posted. What is this one called? Light Red Over Black by Mark Rothko, 1957. I hope it's real, because whenever you Google Rothko images, half of them are just by fucking fakers. Impressionism. Thank you, Delilah. That's exactly what I was thinking of. So Rothko, his paintings, to me, I like them so much because they're aware of what they are. They present themselves as paintings. We were just talking about how much of art is experienced, at least in the realm of visual art, much of it is just experienced as this visceral phenomena. You see it, you see the colors, and you immerse yourself in the vibes, brah, right? And I think that his work is an explicit example of this. It knows that there's a painting. It is a painting. So I'm just going to put paint on canvas. I'm not going to burden my piece with all of these other things. And I'm just going to try to make a thing that is viscerally enjoyable, because this is sort of what painting exists to do, right? To be looked at. It doesn't need to be figurative necessarily, though. Of course, all paintings are abstractions. I wouldn't even say that Rothko's art is more abstract than a thing like Jan van Eyck or Van Gogh or anything. Maybe it's abstracted further, but implicitly, I mean, all art is abstract. All art is simply just an abstraction of ideas, recontextualized into an independent piece and then given back to our human peers, our audience, to talk about whether or not we like it and whether or not we think it's good art or bad art. And this is why I don't necessarily think that representational painting is worse, but I enjoy non-representational painting much more because it's less burdened with these ideas. When I look at a Rothko, I can think about the fact that painting just exists as paint on canvas. I can get more to the essence of why I like painting in the first place, versus when I stare at some Flemish still life of a dead peasant and some apples, then I think about the peasant and the apples, which is fine and fun, but it doesn't feel as fun to think about as these more profound feelings I feel, the visceral excitement I feel when I look at this Rothko piece. So, what say you guys? I haven't been looking at the chat for a minute because y'all are just going ham tonight. Miguel says all art is political. For what reason, Miguel? Why do you say all art is political? Do you guys agree with this idea? I've seen it put forth many times that all art is political. I mean, perhaps depending on the context of this conversation, you could also argue all individuals are political because we all exist in political realities, I don't think all art is necessarily political, unless you want to say every statement ever made is political. Because as Cammie said earlier, and something I agree with, is that art is almost like a language, It makes statements. But Cammie, you said that you feel art makes deeper statements than language. And I would disagree with that. I don't think that that's true. I think it's a language in and of its own accord, but it's just one that's harder to interface in a more direct way. You can't look up in the dictionary like, what is this art piece? Minced, what isn't in here, but again, I'll reference her. Hi, Minced. Hope you listen to this later. She was talking recently about some thinker, I'll look them up and post in the comments, who puts forward this idea that we don't have a vocabulary that encapsulates like this experience or any of our visual experiences, like how we navigate the world visually really is like this incredibly complex interface that we don't really have like a language for at all. We create a language, a verbal and a written language, to partially describe some of what we feel through our visual experiences, but as far as visual experience itself goes, we don't necessarily have some vocabulary that we can like truly talk about what kinds of things it is that makes us experience art in this more visceral way. But like Cami said, I agree that art makes a statement. And for me, what makes art enjoyable is how interesting it is, And what makes any statement interesting. I think this is always changing for its relative context, Something that was interesting 2 centuries ago, and for good reason, might seem less interesting now in 2019. It's not that like what we create now in 2019 is implicitly more interesting, but I think as humanity goes on, whatever trajectory we're on, naturally, statements are going to become more complex. We're going to build more on old statements, and the context of everything is ever changing, and how interesting something can become, History is always being revised and moderated, Even people, something interesting I've noticed, I feel like even people that might have been held in high esteem a few decades ago that existed in the beginning part of this century or our most recent century, even they're like beginning to be forgotten, because we're realizing like, oh shit, you're really like not that deep, Like I feel like Freud is a good person. Like his work has gone through so many peaks and valleys in just a short period of time since he existed, as far as how it's taken by the public. I don't even know where you guys are, but I love to see you all fighting about art. That makes me happy. That brings me joy. Miguel, art by itself is open to interpretation, and by itself is open to be interpreted through a political lens. Sure, Miguel, everything is open to being interpreted by a political lens, and clearly, every individual is going to interpret every art piece differently, right? But can I ask you, how do you define art, Do you think art exists? Or is art just this nice little ephemeral concept we came up with that doesn't really mean anything? It just means if you happen to find something art, which according to you, I don't even know what the definition of art would be, then that's art. Art is whatever you think art is. Like, great. Is that what you're saying? I don't understand what you're saying. Because all I've put forth, I don't think is contentious. I'm going to try to rein you back on the topic a little bit because you guys are going off about whatever. Like, what is the root of any of our disagreements, Like, I believe that art is simply a thing created by humans with the purpose of being presented for its aesthetic properties. You make a thing, you think it's aesthetically interesting, and you put it out into the world. That's art, Is that a contentious idea? Does anyone disagree with this basic premise? Let's try to track the root of our disagreements here. ODD says art is a creative word. It doesn't really mean shit. Well, all words are created, and all words mean something, right? That's why we created them. We create both the word and the meaning. So I would disagree with you, ODD. I would say that art is a created word, but because it's a created word, it has meaning. We created it and we gave it a meaning. Miguel, art is any piece that has the ability to elicit an emotional response from the viewer. Really, Miguel? I disagree with you, though, because tell me what's an emotional response? What, according to you, is an emotional response? Because I think that, I disagree with your definition simply because I don't know how you would even define emotional response. Like I was saying earlier, I believe that I have an emotional response to lots of art, just like I have I think it's kind of similar to how I have an emotional response to philosophy, but it's not emotional in the sense that it's an easily identified emotion. For me, the emotion is excitement, excitement to witness this good art, excitement to be a part of this human community that produces art, and excitement for my peers that make it, excitement, feeling some sense of competition, like, ooh, I want to make it too, I would say I absolutely have an emotional response to art, but I don't know how you're defining emotional response. That's something that's so subjective. I don't think you can really, you shouldn't integrate it into the definition of art, Like, is a tree art if you say it's art, What do we think? Are trees art if you say they're art? To me, this kind of attitude cheapens everything that I think is so good about art and why I do have a meaningful relationship with art, contrary to what Miguel is saying about me. You seem to, think that I am, I don't know, being a dick or something, but I think that what makes art so enjoyable is that it creates interesting ideas, They're landmarks of human achievement in the realm of thought. Because I agree with what Kimmy said, that art is like a language, Art makes statements, just like philosophy, just like literature, just like anything, And it makes statements with this aesthetic language it creates for itself. Chris Marquez, trees are not art. I agree with you. Unless Jesus made them, which I don't believe that he did. Abominable Love says, art to me is a consolidation of two or more things that already exist. In parentheses, are dead. It's creating freshness and life from something that has already been experienced. Are you saying this, Abominable Love, because of this idea that exists that, there's no truly original thought and everything is like some sort of recycled thing? Or are you just saying it's an externalization of inner concepts? Because I think, I think people probably, I just don't like these definitions, guys. I don't like it. Let's talk about photography. I think that this also helps parse some of these ideas out a little bit when you talk about photography. I'm someone who very much dislikes most photography. Not that I hate looking at photographs, love photographs. Photographs are great. But I don't like a lot of what has been hailed as good photography in the art world. Because I don't really like representational photography, Especially a lot of portrait photography. Because to me, a lot of portrait photography relies too heavily, I think. I think it's too burdened by concepts. So much portrait photography is taking pictures of your friend shooting up heroin or something. And being like, yeah, bro, I know people that shoot up heroin. Ooh, look, I found this person. Oh, look, I'm hanging out with these prostitutes for a week. Oh, look, I went to this war protest. Oh, look. Bro, that's cool, but what is it about your art piece that has to do with photography? You're assuming that all photography is good for is capturing something. To me, it pays no mind to the format itself, Literally, this process of light interacting with celluloid, with emulsion, and creating these amazing shapes and images in direct response to the light that it's exposed to and where it's not exposed to the light, and then it's developed. I didn't mute you, Kamari. I think you're just going a little hard and people probably don't know how to address you. So photography, I think the most interesting photography, if you see my separating the art from the artist video on this channel, I put images of some of the photographs that I enjoy looking at, and I'm not saying are objectively better, Miguel, if you're still listening, but that I enjoy better because I think that these photographs are more self-critical in the way that I believe Rothko and the abstract expressionists, though I very much hate some of them, because I think that their work too was very burdened by concept, especially Jackson Pollock, who I despise. I hate his pieces of art. They're so ugly. I can't even look at them. I feel sick. I feel sick just thinking about it. But I think that representational photography to me is not very interesting. I like photographs that are actually concerned with the fact that photography is a material process, and you can do all sorts of interesting things with the surface of the film itself. You can do all sorts of interesting processes with developing and exposure and yada fucking yada. I want to have my interest piqued, looking at photography that's purely representational, that's purely a picture of something cool, to me is kind of like looking at the still lifes. It's like, yeah, sure, they're beautiful, but am I interested? Am I intrigued? Does it make me think very much? No, not really at all. It could be like if I had no knowledge of what the fuck this photo is or is supposed to be. Let's say it's your friend shooting up heroin. I don't know what heroin is. I don't know what your friends are. I'm thinking of Larry Clark's work specifically. Sorry, Larry. Love kids, love bully, but not a huge fan of your photography. Yeah, I don't know what heroin is. I don't know what Oklahoma is. How am I supposed to enjoy this art piece, It relies on so much, and you're assuming I know what the fuck any of this stuff is. Chris, perhaps photography is about the development of technology as art requires some level of reflection of its time period. What do you mean by that? I'm interested in what you mean by that. Art is dead, Bin Laden. I said it first. I have an entire song called Art is Dead, though I think it's on YouTube as Miracle Girl because I'm trying to trick people into watching it. Chris says, photography is not just a material process, but a product of modernity, so it quickly loses a lot of its appeal for a lack of combinations of scenery and setup. Well, what art format, though, really is timeless, I think that we're really in an interesting period in the history of art because historically, really the only art ever being made until recently was what? Music, painting, sculpture, and architecture, These are the things that are considered timeless or whatever, but are they really? I mean, painting, in my opinion, is in I don't know, is painting dead? I feel like the last century killed painting, and I'm not sad about that. I mean, painting's cool, but shit, maybe it's time to give painting a funeral and let it go. Film is my favorite format ever, but it's crazy when I think about the history of film. Film barely even existed 100 years ago, Film has already came and left. I think film is dead too. It's crazy. It's crazy. And I think really relevant, you bring up technology, Chris. Technology definitely changes art, I think that we're in a transition where I think soon the 2D image is going to be obliterated entirely. I think all movies will be watched through some sort of virtual reality screen. I think also the internet is going to be interacted more with in a virtual reality type way. The way we interface with the internet, I think, is likely going to dramatically change. Miguel Jordan says film isn't dead. Tell me why. Miguel, do you think postmodernism killed the medium of art? No, but I think it dramatically transformed our understanding of art, And I think for a lot of people, maybe people such as yourself even, I think this is hard to deal with because it hurts, It hurts for myself, somebody who spent 4 years of my life insisting I only work with film because I didn't believe in digital. I was a little hard ass. I refused to even touch any sort of digital technology my entire time at art school. I only worked on the optical printer because I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna only work with film. I hate all your stupid digital photographs and digital video. So it hurts to realize that actually, like, film as a format has all but died out. Who even makes film anymore? Kodak has discontinued pretty much all of its stocks except for a few, and the ones that remain I think are like generally pretty horrendous. They look like shit. I mean, there's not even like a good 35mm stock anymore, which just breaks my fucking heart, because my favorite film format is 35mm black and white. But I'm not going to lie to myself. Film is clearly being phased out, you know. Now it's all about digital video, and I'm saying I think digital video will soon be replaced by something that's experienced more in a 3D space. Film isn't dead because they're still shooting big event pictures in 70mm film. Clearly, film still exists, Miguel. I'm just saying that film is clearly being phased out by digital technology. You're gonna have to accept it. Yes, we know they shoot movies still in 70mm film, but I'm just telling you the hard facts. I mean, you can deny it all you want, but as somebody who is one of the biggest fans of film you'll ever meet, I'm telling you that film is on its way out. This conversation was a bit of a shit show. What else? We got some ideas. I'm gonna stay here for 15 minutes more max. I'm feeling burnt out on art. It's hard. It's hard being so misunderstood. What do you guys think about this idea, though? That really the way that we can judge art... Well, I feel like I didn't even elaborate on this. Let me elaborate further a little bit. I want to know how you guys feel about this because it's important to me. Chris says, good art is about itself, connects to technology, and that art is singular. Art must be original. I don't think art must be original, because original is also a vague term, you know. But in thinking about, for myself, what makes good art, you know, I think that if the purpose of all art is simply to be art, just like the purpose of all trees is simply to be trees, and the purpose of a knife is to be a knife, the purpose of a couch is to be a couch, you know. It has all these peripheral purposes, like you sit on a couch and stuff, you know. But clearly, I think the goal of any object is to be the thing. And the thing is only defined by us. We give it meaning with our language. I think that for me, what makes art interesting and what makes art good is art that really makes you think about what the fuck art is in the first place, you know? What the fuck is enjoyable about it? How can we get to the root of what is enjoyable about it and manipulate these processes in a way where we exhibit control? Because I think that's also a big part of why we appreciate art. I mean, I think that the appreciation of all art is intrinsically linked to our knowledge that it was created by a human individual. There's intelligence and intentionality behind all art, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm just going with the dictionary definition, you know. This is why I say a tree is not art, because no matter how beautiful a tree is, no matter how much I admire it for its aesthetic presentation and my phenomena of experiencing it, and it evokes whatever emotional response within me, I don't consider the tree art because for me there's nothing intentional behind it. No one created it except the universe, and of course the universe is awesome. Not trying to say the universe isn't the shit, because it clearly is. But I just think that tree is a word, it has a definition. Art is a word, it has a definition, you know. If you make a thing and tell me this is a microwave, even though it doesn't microwave my food, like, how long am I supposed to entertain that idea? That's kind of how I feel about these people who go about, like, art is whatever evokes some emotional response within you. It's like, so it means nothing, basically. Because all types of things evoke emotional responses, you know. Stubbing my toe evokes a very strong emotional response within me. Is that art? Is stubbing my toe art? And then people will be like, yeah, it is. And I'm like, bro, To me, this really cheapens what I think is so amazing about art, which is that it's created with intentionality and intelligence. And it's a way for all of us to share ideas with each other and show off our mastering of a thing that is rooted in materiality, you know? I think it's a showcase of human ability, and that's part of why it's so beautiful to me. Miguel, some art pieces are very much about sending a message, though. Those pieces of art aren't about themselves, their existence is to spread awareness. How does that make that not about themselves, though? You know? Like, what? I don't understand how it's not about themselves just because you're trying to state something else as well. I think that, let's say you're trying to make an art piece that does spread some sort of a message, right? You might have some sort of a message in your art that you want to communicate to others, but the chances of having this message, I think, actually be heard by the public that you are trying to share it with will increase if you make a piece of art that is truly good, you know? Like, let's think about feminist art. Like, I hate so much feminist art, historically. I don't really know what's going on right now in the realm of feminist art. But, you know, historically, there's a lot of, like, Jackson Pollock type bullshit being done with period blood and stuff, you know? As an ardent feminist myself, of course, like, I probably agree with whatever message these women are trying to convey. But I think that they're going to fail at conveying this message to others because they made something that's not aesthetically pleasing. It's not interesting on any sort of conceptual level. Their art piece will crash and burn, and so will their accompanying statement, you know? Like, or I can just, like, you know, take a crayon and write, like, I don't know, fucking stop being racist and hang it up in a gallery. Like, do you think that if someone else were actually to make a piece of art that was interesting as an artwork, wouldn't, and also have the same message as my piece, wouldn't the chances increase that this message you're trying to convey to the masses, the chances will greatly increase that the masses will actually hear your fucking message if you make a piece of art that is good in and of itself as an art piece, you know? Like, people didn't just, like, speaking of race, you know, people didn't just like the film Get Out or Us because it was about race. They like the films because they're really well-made films. And the statements that Jordan Peele is also making about race now reach a wider audience because he made something that's artistically valid and good based on criteria that I know you're saying cannot be considered objective, but I would greatly disagree with you. Of course, what you can't say that it will be objectively good to people or whatever. And I wouldn't use this language if I was a film critic. Like, the film is objectively good because they did X, Y, Z, you know. But when you study filmmaking, when you study art making, you know, like, you learn about processes. These things are rooted in materiality. You want to get good at color correction? You better learn about how the fuck light interacts with emulsion and how film is processed, how color is done with film, you know, what kinds of formats. We're just talking about 70 millimeter. Like, these are all things that, you know, the more knowledge you have of them, the higher your chances are of being able to achieve something interesting. So, any thoughts before I get out of here and make some art? ODD says, people these days don't view this the way you do. You have to be realistic. What do you mean by that? Chris, was the shredding of Banksy's art piece also about it itself, or was this destruction an example of pointing out that very thing, then ironically shedding it? I don't know. What do you guys think about Chris's question? We talked about this a little bit in the last discussion, destroying art as art. I have to admit, I thought that shit was hilarious. But I also think that it was kind of whatever, simply because I don't think Banksy is necessarily the right person to make that art piece. I think it would have been funnier if it like came from a nobody, like someone selling their art piece for the first time. No one has any idea like who this person is. Then they sell it and then they're just like, boop, it's gone. And as soon as he shredded the piece too, didn't its value go up by like $5 million? I mean, yeah, it's absurd and it's still hilarious. But we also said in the last discussion that if you want to destroy art as art, it's much better if you destroy someone else's art. Personal opinion here, not condoning the destruction of anyone else's art, but I'm just saying, definitely rings different. Miguel is 3 times the artist you will ever be, Buttress, says Kumari. That hurts, but I'm also glad to see you guys become friends because, in the beginning of this discussion, you two are really going at it. I'm glad that you seem to have reached some sort of camaraderie with each other. I think that's beautiful. I think Phenomenology Club is so good at bringing people together. Look at that. Look at that. All right, I'm going to get out of here. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I'm glad that we were able to rein in the strange people. You're welcome to come back. Thank you for turning your discussion content to being about art. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications if you want to keep doing this. And also, I mean, I won't do it without warning, but I am very much thinking about putting these behind the Patreon paywall. So if you want to continue interacting with them live, I mean, I'm not saying for sure this will happen, but just go give me $1. Like, it's literally $1. So if you love me, do it. It's patreon.com/phenomenology club. And if you join, especially you weirdos in the chat, you can get on voice chat in there with us and yell back at me. Isn't that awesome? So, hope everyone has a great rest of your Sunday. Got a few more hours left of this weekend, and enjoy your week. I'll see y'all later. Goodbye.